Hello, how are you? Very well, thank you.
The center? No. Oh, it's going to be something.
Minister, let me start by asking about the international LNG market. It seems at the moment there's a global oversupply. Prices are quite low. What's your outlook for the global market for LNG?
Well, as you know, the global gas market has changed, especially since the financial crisis and the crisis in the growth, in the various economies, but also because of the non-conventional gas technology developed in the US. So this has put lots of pressure on the spot market, of course, and indirectly on the long-term, contracts. However, if we look at in the long term, definitely from the environmental point of view and from the point of view of satisfying the global demand, there is going to be a big need for natural gas. So we think that this is just a transitory problem, and it's going to pass away within the 2-3 years, and things will come back again. Especially that because of this crisis, lots of the investments that have been planned, have been postponed. So I think this thing will iron out within the next 2 to 3 years.
And within 2 to 3 years, we'll see prices coming back up?
Well, I assume, the prices were pretty good before the crisis. I mean, they were about 80% parity, with oil. And as you know, most of the, responsible of the various countries, including the Emir of Qatar, had declared that the objective is to have parity with oil. So consequently, that same objective is still valid. And we think because of the strong demand in the future, we're going to go back to that objective, and after there will be some equilibrium in the market.
What are Algeria's own plans with regard to LNG? What's the...
Well, as you know, LNG, we produce about almost 40% of our overall gas exports are in the form of LNG. Most of our LNG go to Europe. Only a small fraction goes to the US. So we don't really have a big problem, especially that the US doesn't need that much LNG now. And most of our spot market is oriented to the Asian market, where we get some premium over the European market. So consequently, we are not doing too bad in that concern, especially that most of our contracts are long-term. So we haven't suffered much. Of course, we have suffered from the point of view of the demand has been lowered to the minimum quantities that have to be taken. But in the long term, our plans is to increase LNG, and we are in the process of building 2 LNG plants, and that will put us around almost 50% of our total export, which is going to be around 85 billion by 2014, is going to be in the form of LNG. And we still think that LNG is going to be absorbed by Europe and in Asian market, where most of the LNG is going to be reoriented. And we already see that, developing now in China, in India. And as you know, also our big market is Europe, but also the Mediterranean basin.
So there's been no scaling back of your LNG investment plans because of the
No, it has been, there are investments that have already been started. The LNG plant in Arzew is about 40%. The one in Skikda is even more advanced. They are within budget. They are within the time delays. So there is no scaling back on those. We were not planning any new LNG. We are, of course, building the MedGas project. It's going to start as planned, this summer, and we hope to increase our gas export through the MedGas by about 8 by the end of the year, 8 billion met cubes. And as you know, we have already increased our gas export through the Enrico Mattei pipeline to Italy by 7. So by next year, by the end of this year, we should be increasing our export by 15 billion met cubes per year over the export we are now making about 60 billion. So that's a big increase, about 25% increase.
Given that demand from the United States for LNG has fallen off so severely,
Yeah.
do you need to look for new markets, and are you looking for new markets elsewhere, and if so, where?
Well, as you know, we learned our hard lesson from the 70s for the El Paso famous contract, between El Paso and Sonatrach. And after we completed the facilities, we found out that we had the same situation we have now, which means that we had a bubble in the U.S. So we went to court, and finally, we came out with an agreement where we ended up owning shares of Anadarko and Duke Energy. So we learned it the hard way, and when Mr. Spencer Abraham invited us a few years back to LNG conference, we actually told them that we learned the hard lesson. We're going to be very careful about getting involved in U.S., and I think we have been proven right not to get involved really that much in the U.S. So we have been really focusing on the Asian market in addition to our involvement in Europe, where we have long-term contracts. So anyway, we're not going to be able to get out of that since we are committed in the long term, except for the volumes that can be lowered. And we think as soon as the financial crisis will be over, we're going to get back again to maximum delivery to Europe.
What about the markets in Asia? Which particular markets are you targeting, and do you expect to see growth in your exports?
Well, basically, our traditional market is Japan, and then Korea, and of course China is a very interesting market, and of course we have India. With India, we're already discussing, and with India we have some good relations in the oil, petroleum products, and crude oil. So these are going to be, the very interesting markets in the future, and I think most of the countries are really oriented, including Russian, are looking in that direction because of the saturation, in the U.S. market. And we know the U.S. market's probably gone for a long time to come because of the huge non-conventional gas, which has been developed in all over the United States. But probably also we're going to see some big development in Europe, and including in Algeria and other parts of the world where we have non-conventional gas resources.
So soon we could see Algerian LNG cargoes going to India?
Well, as soon as we have the two LNG plants, the first one is going to come in, I think, 2012, and the second one is going to be 2014. So we're already looking at the possibility of getting to those markets.
In Doha in December at the GECF summit, you talked about the idea of gas swaps to reduce delivery costs.
Yeah.
Is that something that you continue to explore, and is that something?
Of course, we have always explored that, because gas swaps, whether they are just LNG or even in countries that don't have LNG but they have only, are a very interesting instrument, to lower the cost. Both for the seller, for the buyer, and is an interesting instrument which we have used already in the past. And I think we need to use even that more because of the glut, in the gas market. So that's one way of reducing the cost and reaching probably more markets, lowering the price. So we're going to see more development of that in the future, especially after we complete our LNG, units.
Are there any specific swaps that you could point to that are under negotiation now?
Well, we are not really, negotiating right now, but possibilities are any swaps through the Suez, the Suez Canal. And because of the crossing, of the boats, and also swaps with Asia, Asia market, where we could deliver to European market, and others would deliver to Asia. There's also a possibility to deliver to the U.S. for those who still have some, So you have those possibilities, and I think we're going to make use of them to the full.
I want to talk a little, if I may, about the Gas Exporting Countries Forum, which will be meeting in Oran in April.
Yeah.
In this situation where demand has fallen for gas of all types, What can the GECF do specifically? What practical measures can it do to bring the prices back up to a level that the members want to see?
Well, first, I think what is important to say is that we have now a forum. We have a Secretary General. I'm presiding over, the forum this year, and we are scheduling, 19th of April of this year, a meeting in Oran. And Algeria, during the Doha meeting, had actually made a presentation on the gas market and has outlined, the issues that we are facing, and convinced our, members that it will be very important to carry out a study. So we are going through that study right now, and we'll be presenting the results of that study, and hopefully out of that will come some actions that will help our member countries achieve a better equilibrium in the gas market, and hopefully stabilizing the price. Now, as you know, the forum is not only that. The forum, actually, the long-term objective is to work together, to reduce the cost through better planning of our investments, better planning of our investments upstream, investment pipelines, investment in the transport, and through the dealing of swaps also reduce costs. So that's the major, really. The second is, of course, to get more members. Because as you get more members, then you get better clout, in the market. And finally, deal with this issue of price stabilization. So we're trying to deal with that, and my role this year will be to focus on those three, objectives, and I hope we'll be able to achieve that. Now, that we have a Secretary General, Mr. Bokanovsky. He'll be coming here probably around the 6th or the 7th of April, so we can prepare pretty well for the 19th of April. And as you know, the 18th of April, we're going to have the LNG 16. So it's going to be a big event in the sense that we're going to have not only the LNG 16, where we're going to have probably around 2,000 people attending. I'm talking about the foreign attendance, but also have the members of the forum, and I think they're going to be numbered around 200, because all the ministers will be present. We are inviting the member countries, but also the countries that would like to have them, join. So we're going to have a big event on the 18th and 19th.
Who are the countries that are knocking on the door of the GECF?
Well, as you know, Egypt has just ratified. We are trying to get Angola. We're trying to get Peru, in the GECF. But all the others are already in there. Even Holland is an observer, in the GECF. So we are really looking now, focusing on outside the present members to get new members like Angola, like Peru. That is a country that's just beginning to export, to be a member in the future.
To what extent do you think the GECF could behave like OPEC? Can you see a situation where the members of the GECF would get together and determine output in order to influence prices? Is that actually possible?
Well, I think we'll wait until to see what the study will come up with. I don't know whether that's possible or not, since if it were possible, I wouldn't have done a study. But we said in the past that there will be some difficulties because most of our sales are long-term contracts, so we cannot reduce the terms. We cannot reduce the volumes beyond what the client, will demand. But definitely there is spot market. Spot market. If there is a huge surplus, in the spot market, maybe there is a chance there to not to supply, because there isn't going to be any demand in that respect. So it's different than oil, but still, I think there are ways where we can first achieve lower cost and also achieve better equilibrium between supply and demand overall, including taking into account the fact that long-term contracts, we cannot change them much.
On the subject of long-term contracts, we understand that Gazprom has changed its pricing structure slightly. It's lowered the level of take-or-pay gas for some clients, and anything those clients want to take over above the new limit, the new threshold of take-or-pay gas, they're offering at spot prices. What's Algeria's view of that? Is that something that Algeria would consider following?
Well, Algeria, we're looking really at, the global, how do you say, equilibrium between the two parties, client and seller. So we're looking at the long term. Of course, already the long-term contract allows, the client to go, let's say, to 85%. So that's something he can do. But at the same time, you cannot go to 85%, tell me that 15% I'm going to take it spot market. So either you go to your volume, lower volume, because a long-term contract is a commitment on both sides. A long-term contract is I'm going to ensure that he's going to have the supply, and he's going to ensure that I have a decent price. That's the agreement. If you want to go to a spot market, both sides are going to take the risk, of the price of the volume. So it's a different game from that point of view. But we are looking at our, the situation for every of our clients, depending on the relationship we have had with that client, depending on whether he's asking for something for the long term or he's asking only for, intermediate or transitory solution. We're going to look at it, and in any case, what we're going to do is look at the interest of the country. What impact any changes would have on our revenues, globally. So that's what is important. So we try to minimize impact on our revenues. As you know, 30% of our revenues come from gas sales. So it's important from that point of view. If we're going to increase volume by 10%, so that's 3%. If we decrease price by 10%, so that's another 3%. So decrease volume, decrease price by 10 and 10%, that means 6% decrease in our revenue. So it's very important.
Clearly it depends on the customer and the situation, but what we can say at this point is that you're not ruling out factoring in spot pricing to contracts.
No, I don't think we are going to be factoring, in the long-term contracts. But we're going to probably look at other ways, of reducing volumes, let's say in the long term. But again, the client is taking the risk that when he wants to come back, he may not find, the volume there. Somebody else would have taken it. So we have to look at the risk that each side is taking and make the right decisions with our clients.
If a client exercises their right to reduce to 85%, what you're saying is that then it's up to them to find the gas on the spot market.
Yeah,
you won't guarantee the volumes for them.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Right, we can sell that gas